Welcome to the Cinematologist podcast. I'm Dario Linares, and down the line, of course, is my good friend Neil Fox. Neil, great to see you.
Great to see you too, and yeah, delighted to be back for another episode. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. It's funny because actually, a couple of people and even my other half have sort of was commented the other day. It was like, "Oh, you're much more relaxed at the moment," and I said, "Yes, not working for a year will do that to you." You know what I mean? Even though it's a slight exaggeration. I have been working, but yeah, I'm kind of. I mean, it's one of those things where I'm in this headspace where I'm kind of reconciling the fact that life just doesn't trundle along perfectly in a comfort zone. You're in, and even things that you kind of have no control over, you just have to kind of deal with.
Yeah.
Stuff around like where we live and problems around that and this kind of stuff and all the prosaic, banal day-to-day experiences. And even I was having a bit of a crisis the other day about sort of the cost of living and just my own personal sort of expenditure and thinking, God, it's so expensive it's just expensive to be alive.
Yeah.
And then, you kind of look on the other side and think about all the good things that are going on, and interesting conversations I'm having. Having my first piece come out in Sight and Sound is nice. New job to start in September. Just lots of good stuff happening. Working with the MA students has been fulfilling. This week, sort of a couple of them have got some really interesting projects, and I've got an interesting piece coming out on Substack, which is kind of collectivizing a lot of the sound work that we've done on the podcast, or the episodes I've kind of produced in that sense. But then we've talked about, because there's they do a film stack challenge over there, and it kind of inspires you to write pieces on about cinema in a particular way. This one was about sound, and it sort of just touched on a load of the work that I've done, and I thought, this is a good opportunity to kind of create an architecture of all that work in one place.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'm excited for that, and
cool.
Yeah, great. I'm glad that the Sight and Sound got a mention on the pod as well. Congrats on that. Look forward to seeing that when it lands.
Cheers.
Yeah, I'm good actually. Yeah, kind of like busy working, trying to get towards the end of sort of my bit of the academic year, because I'm teaching on the MA and also sort of involved in a lot of researchy annual reporting stuff, which is still going on. So used to be that teaching would end and that would feel like the end of a certain type of work for the year, but that doesn't really feel the same anymore, which is fine. But it just means I'll be taking a bit of a later break. Been good. I saw Kneecap last week in Plymouth.
Oh wow!
Who were
band of the moment in many ways.
Yeah, and saw them in this absolutely tiny venue, like a few hundred people. They did 3 nights. They were astonishing. They were absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, and it was like a few days after Glastonbury, so the energy in the room was absolutely electric. It's very sweaty.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was a nice little trip to Plymouth. But yeah, otherwise just been working on these episodes really. So this one and another one we're going to record our bit for today have been things that I've sort of been watching a lot of stuff for, reading stuff for, and then doing the interviews for, which has been nice actually. Two interviews that I'm really sort of proud of for different reasons, and sort of just been a nice time podcast wise really.
Great. Yeah, I would imagine your phenomenological experience of Kneecap was very different to the last thing I went to kind of physically, which was Wimbledon. I think that sort of defines the difference in our personalities, maybe, those two excursions.
Maybe, but that's something that will come up again later.
Indeed.
In terms of the differences in the things, how we like to spend our leisure time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is obviously the next taping we've done after the episode we did on Ryan Gilbey, and I know you got some comments back on that around the episode and sort of the context that we talked about on the show.
Yeah, no, so that was obviously a very emotional episode for a number of reasons, and yeah, just after it was released, I got a really beautiful message from Ryan, who listened to it just before he was doing an event for the book, the first book event that he'd done since his son Barney had died. And he listened to it just before that and sent me a beautiful message. And then over the next couple of days, I heard from Barney's brother Casey and Barney's mum as well via Ryan with some really lovely messages expressing kind of a gratitude for the fact that we'd dedicated the episode to Barney, but also the way that we'd done it and sort of the tenor of the conversation. And they also loved the conversation that we had and the conversation with Ryan. You know, so the episode as a whole felt like it was really meaningful to them at that time. So that was a really nice response from them. So I wanted to just acknowledge that and say thank you to them for listening, because it must have been quite difficult, but also for responding with such kindness around the approach that we'd taken and the end result.
Yeah. So I mean, nothing really to add to that. Thoughts go out to them, and it was our pleasure, really. I mean, obviously that's probably not the right term, but it felt the right way to approach the episode when Ryan said that he wanted it still to go out, and and to be honest, it was a really sort of fruitful conversation, anyway at the end, and I thought sort of tied into some of those things about finding identity and that kind of thing, and maybe other listeners sort of, hopefully it registered with them on the same tenor, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today's episode, so you spoke to a friend of yours and well-known, very good director, Alex Ross Perry, and you spoke about he spoke about two of his films, but mainly Pavements, which is the documentary about the band Pavement, and we actually spoke about Pavement in the London Film Festival episodes. I think it was number 2 of the main show. We sort of got into the film then, and I knew that this was obviously coming up in terms of you wanting to speak to the director, because it was really interesting to listen to his process, and the complexity of it kind of married up to the complexity of the film in a kind of interesting way, in ways that there was a couple of times I actually had to go back and sort of think, what did he say there? Can I kind of unpack the threads of that? So I've kind of got it in my brain. But yeah, really great conversation, Neil. How did you sort of find it? And now you've reflected a little bit on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I enjoyed it, but one of the things I realized afterwards is that I find I've interviewed Alex a couple of times over the years for masterclasses. Also, in my first piece for The Quietus was an interview with him around Listen Up, Philip, when that was released, and I find him quite intimidating to talk to.
My first question after the interview is kind of going to be along those lines. So stay tuned, cool, if you want to hear Neil a bit more uncomfortable later on.
Yeah. And I'm happy to I've been thinking about that discomfort, which is a nice discomfort, but certainly is there over the last few days, and had some conversations around that. So, but yeah, what was really exciting about it was, obviously I love the film and I love his work, but it's really like the release in the UK of this film has sort of coincided with the podcast for the first time really in 10 years of doing it. So it felt like a really good time to reach out and see if he would come on and put myself through that the discomfort, which we'll talk, the ringer, in a good way. So yeah, but no, I mean, as he's always been, and he's always been really generous with his time and his thoughts, and he did a book event for me in New York last year when I was sort of touring the book, which was great, and weirdly wasn't intimidated that time, but yeah, he's just lovely and generous and supportive of the stuff that I've been doing, and yeah, it's nice to be able to have him on the podcast for this film and Videoheaven. So the reason that I wanted to talk about Videoheaven as well is that's got a kind of very, very independent release, which he mentions in the interview. So it's not got a traditional release, and because they're sort of released at the same time, I wanted to touch on both of those. So this is our conversation. This is me with Alex Ross Perry.
Please welcome Pavement! You're the best band in the 90s.
For kids who felt like everything was stupid and everything sucked, they were your band.
Hey, listen to me. I'm on your stereo. People told me I kind of look like him. I can't play Billy Joel.
Steven, I would never do anything to compromise your integrity. What if it really was like a moment like this?
You couldn't write it, you know? Stranger than fiction.
This could be a terrible idea.
Come on in.
My first Pavement album was on cassette. It truly changed my life.
I heard Pavement for the first time 6 weeks ago.
Great. I'll try to look like you, you try to look like me.
I don't think I really want to be Steven. I don't want to be Steven anymore.
Well, if you're trying to sound cool and smart, you're going to talk about Pavement.
It's kind of weird, but, you know, so is good music.
I thought it was supposed to be fake. This is all real.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I rewatched the film. We talked about the film on the podcast around London when we were sort of doing our London Film Festival roundup. And I watched it again at the weekend ahead of this, and I just loved the film so much. And the film this is the film that it reminded me of the most when I rewatched it the weekend, which might seem weird, but it was Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York.
Yeah, people say that a lot.
Oh, okay, cool.
I hate that movie, and I don't like him at all, really, anymore. But I see what people say this like it's a compliment, and I believe that to them it is. But because I saw that movie once and it was torture, and I've never rewatched it, I don't quite get it. But I would welcome an explanation if you felt like listeners would enjoy that.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't necessarily like, as in, it feels like the same kind of film. I think they're doing very, very different things. Obviously, that's kind of narrative, although this kind of has really interesting narratives. It's more just the way that as the film grows, it's kind of building these layers of legacy. Like it's kind of it's almost as if the initial way of doing it, which might be called like a traditional music film, is not enough. So
yeah,
you need to keep finding ways to further tell the story or add to the myth or try and figure out how to do the thing that you're trying to do as you go. So that was the kind of the resonance. Yeah.
No, I mean, there's only so many ways to talk about like a movie that the act of watching it is like it's like a Looney Tunes cartoon where like Wile E. Coyote is like out over a bridge and laying down the next path before he steps. I know that Synecdoche in New York is kind of like that in its narrative, and we're kind of like that as well with the way that the story unfolds, and you feel like the process of watching the thing is of watching creation happening and growing larger, sort of because and despite of what the movie needs it to do.
But it also feels like a deepening as well, like you're using all these different ways of doing it to try and deepen your understanding of the band and the story, but also the viewers, you know, to give them kind of more to be kind of engaging with.
I hope so.
Yeah. And the tone of the film is really, really striking. It kind of has this half sincere, half subversive quality, which I wanted to sort of unpack, because that feels like it's really, really close to who Pavement are, you know, as a band. Like it all seems like they're kind of treading this line. And you yourself as sort of having a role in the film, sort of contribute to that, which I did want to kind of get to. How much of it, like the intention in terms of the tone and trying to capture sort of the Pavement as a band was in your mind as you went into the filmmaking?
Well, it's the first and most sort of urgent necessity at the outset of coming up with what will we do, what will the movie be, because no matter what you're doing, and I'm sure every music movie attempts this, and I'm sure 90% of them fall short. The question is like, what is the bespoke quality of this subject to me, to us, the filmmakers, and what is a film version of that quality? And 5 years ago when starting this, I was like, 100 different Pavement fans would have 100 different answers, but I'm the one making the movie. So my answers are, I love that this band has beautiful, sincere music. I love that the depiction of that identity, the way they marketed themselves, interviews, is ironic, humorous, sort of makes people think these guys aren't taking this seriously, but then the music is perfection, so they must be taking it seriously. And therefore, this is a story about an artist who is contradicting themselves while they are existing. And the movie needs to be ironic, sincere, contradictory, funny, stupid, celebratory, self-mocking, all the things that the band was for 10 years and sort of continue to be in a different middle-aged way. Is just, if you're not doing that, then you failed to put your finger on something that would only make sense for the band you are currently making a story about.
Yeah. I mean, I think I love that, because I think that, but I think that's really rare. You know, I think that's one of the things I'm drawn to in the film, is I don't think that a lot of filmmakers really take that care with the subject. I don't think many are interested in trying to find that way of telling, you know. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, of course, this is a film about Pavement, in a way that so many films about other musicians just, yeah, they don't feel that way. So yeah, I think it's so lovely to hear you say that, because I think, but I do think that's a rare approach, sadly.
Yeah, and I think that part of what made the producers bring this idea to me and what made me feel excited about it is, you know, there's artists I love way more than Pavement, that there's no humor, is not in the DNA of what I love about them, nor is there humor in their work. Now that's fine for many bands, but finding a band who's from the very beginning, interviews have humor, their music videos have humor, song titles have humor, it becomes a much more fertile opportunity for making a movie, because you're able to be both insightful, celebratory, funny, you know, all these things that a movie wants to be. But very few subjects suggest that that is the correct or only way to tell their story.
Yeah. It's just lovely to hear you talk about the way, because I think so many filmmakers sort of caveat making a music film at the start with this kind of disclaimer that they're, you know, I'm not making just a music film, as if the idea of a music film is something which is so horrible to even, you know, or so boring or dull, you know. Whereas I think when it's approached like this, it can be a really kind of wonderful forum for both the music but also cinema. Like, it feels like a really cinematic film, and gives a sort of cinematic tenor to their music in a way that probably wasn't necessary there at the time.
Yeah, but just because that's not really the way most independent artists would frame themselves. You know, there are cinematic sounding albums and musicians, and this is not that. You know, people would say for 50 years, oh, you know, David Bowie, very cinematic. It's very, you can feel visual, and that's true. But and that's why David Bowie has 15 credible films made already. This is not that, but that doesn't mean that it can't be.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about just the editing of it, in terms of, like, obviously you worked with Robert before, but there's something really extraordinary about the editing in this film, which just, you kind of feel it as it's going. You sort of feel that it's being edited, and not in a bad way, but just in terms of, like, some of the kind of the things that you're doing, particularly around time.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly, it's deft editing, and it's absurdly complicated in a way that, because it works, I don't think people can even process how complicated it is. It's a 2-hour movie. It has 3 hours of footage in it, because half of the movie has split screens and you're looking at 2 images at the same time, or even 3 or sometimes 4. It's just a complexity that to us and to Robert, the world's #1 Pavement fan, is inextricable from the layered collage experience of their album covers or of their songwriting or of some of their stage visuals. And it is this sort of impossible challenge that we set ourselves of chronologically editing 4 movies at once, where you have to track a band's story from the late 80s to their breakup, track that same band's story from their reunion in 2022 onward, and then track the staging and execution of 3 stunts that I created and fabricated under fictional auspices to be documented in non-fictional visual terms. And those things have to happen in a way that is not just concurrent, but is occasionally complementary, occasionally contradictory, but hopefully always revelatory. Where you must always be showing an archival moment at the same time as a scripted phony baloney moment that I wrote, as a way of showing the archival moment is real, the phony baloney moment is based on reality, but is stupid in its own way. And that we will continue to play this game where we show you the way a scripted film would treat this moment, but then we show you the actual moment and you see like, oh, well, that is exactly what that person thought. But the way that it's written and the way that this would be written in another type of movie would be very false, but it's false based on reality.
Yeah.
Some of this is just the complexity that we really wanted to always be playing.
Yeah. And then you get also the it's those are kind of references to the past, but then there is this contemporary moment where they're back together in a way that felt very different to like the 2010 period in terms of where they are in the culture, certainly. And they're also playing those songs and going through those same dynamics, which kind of makes it really contemporary as well as this reflection, which kind of keeps it current in a way that a lot of films kind of just feel like they're always looking backwards, even if there's a band that are. And that's because the time is just, it's all layered on top of each other in this really, complex but fascinating way.
It would be very different, and I don't know how I would wrap my head around such a challenge of this band is dead, the members are not alive, the band doesn't exist anymore, there is no contemporary moment to film, make a movie about them. Obviously, there are these movies, and I enjoy many, and I watch a lot, but to me, there's just not enough complexity there to think I could cram 1,000 ideas into 2 hours.
And there are so many ideas here. You said you were working on it for 5 years, so obviously there's an approach.
Yeah. 4 really, just 5 now, because I started 5 years ago, but of course we finished the movie about this time last year.
Yeah. When did it start to take the shape that it sort of became in terms of like it all fitting together, or you being like, okay, this is becoming the film that I want it to be?
I mean, Robert's we finished all of the shooting, which was filming the tour off and on, creating the museum, creating the musical, and making the fake movie, which was June 2023, at which point everything was finished. The filming was largely complete. I would say by September, Robert had already been grappling with the footage. He got right into, sort of after the musical, which was December 2022, he got right into the edit. And by the end of that summer, by September, he just knew, he said, like, we finished all those shoots, and I said, I just don't really know what the movie will be. I've created all these things, and I know what these conversations will be like when the movie's finished. I know what the movie will seem like, what it will represent, but I don't actually know, like, minute by minute what to do. And he was like, I do. I know what to do, and I will do this. Just give me lots and lots of time and space. And I gave him that space, and I was just watching tons of edits and talking to him all the time. And really, because that's summer 23, writer's strike was happening. And I know that whole summer, my every job I was working on was on hold. That whole summer, I was watching cuts of the movie twice a week, or I would watch an hour, or he would call me and say, like, I'm uploading this 30-minute segment covering the Crooked Rain era. I know, of course, it will be 15 minutes eventually, but I just want to, So it was all happening kind of as soon as these little pieces of filming were winding down.
Cool. And then, yeah, that's pretty not long, and then until it's actually finished last summer.
Yeah. I mean, he was editing right up until sort of the Venice invitation happened, and we kind of had to finish.
You're in the film as well, which is refreshing to see. You in your own film since I guess it was The Color Wheel was the last time.
Yeah.
How much of that was, it felt like you needed to be there because you're making the film, and the part of the making of the film is part of it, and how much of it is, having fun with the whole project?
Yeah, I didn't really think too much about it. I mean, the filming of the musical, every day that we were doing rehearsals and casting, that was as much like a documentary as possible. So I'm just there because that's the reality. But for a year, we were holding firm to the idea that I would not be in that musical storyline, and that Angela Trimber, who is making the musical with me and choreographing it all, is that we would sort of just make it seem like she was the only person shaping the show, and that the composers were the only other people, and I wasn't in. I mean, you would see me in the background, but I was never on camera. And then we got to a point, like a year into the edit, where the musical, it's not that it wasn't working, but it wasn't landing for people in the most correct way for us. And we realized that was because fundamentally nobody knew how to take it. They could not tell, is this supposed to be taken as though this is a beautiful, brilliant, great idea? Or is this supposed to be like Best in Show, where I'm just, or Waiting for Duffman, where I'm just laughing at these people? And we realized, if I'm in it and we have the footage of this, and I send Robert like voice memos on my phone, acting as though I'm explaining why we're making the musical, but I explain it in such comedic, pompous terms that anyone watching it will know that this is a joke, then it's not that they're not taking the musical seriously, but they know this cannot be real. This has to be some fabrication. So we have this footage that we managed to film just because we had 10 extra minutes of me in the theater, leather jacket, sunglasses, looking deeply pretentious and obnoxious in the way a theater director might. And that becomes really helpful. And we overlay it with voice memos that I made 2 years after we filmed it, just as a way of letting people know everyone putting this show on is working very hard. The movie's conceit is you are permitted to laugh at this just enough. Yeah. Because otherwise people were just lost. And that became a very valuable tool. Fundamentally, all of which to say, like, anybody making a movie probably at some point is getting feedback in the edit and has the thought, what I would love to do in this movie is step out in front of the audience, look at the camera, and tell people, this is what I am doing, this is the point, this is my intention, and this is how I want you to watch it. In this movie, I literally could do that, so I figured I have to take this opportunity to just stand in front of the audience and say, yeah, this is probably a terrible idea, but I just thought we had to try. That's the best I could offer. And I just thought that I want people thinking about that when they watch the movie. And in this film, I am able to just say to the audience, hi, I'm the director. Here's how I need you to watch this film.
Amazing. And it's really funny. Like, it's really funny when you say, I love Pavement and I love musical theater, because, yeah, you kind of, again, set a tone. But also, as you watch these people put this musical on, yeah, they are working really hard. And also, they're really talented and really good, and giving it everything. Like, it doesn't feel like you're ever making fun of them or even the idea of doing a musical.
No, I'm not. I take it seriously. I'm doing my best. They're doing their best. It's very real and very meaningful, but it is, for better or worse, something that many people just look at and think, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Why am I watching musical theater? I don't like musical theater. I don't want to watch it. Well, that's fine. You're okay. That's okay with us. We just need to tell you, we know that this can be seen as ridiculous. And we want you to bring that incredulous eye to the experience of watching this segment of this movie.
Which, again, kind of everything you're saying there in terms of like, what the hell is this? And that kind of incredulous eye is something that Pavement themselves had sort of labeled at them when they were kind of, at their height by kind of audiences, but also things like Beavis and Butthead. Do you know what I mean? That there's a response to them which feels, kind of similar in terms of some of the stuff that was sort of directed put in their direction.
Certainly. And again, like, it just is this endless question of what is the spirit that we are trying to do.
Yeah. And someone who gets into the spirit of it beautifully is Joe Cleary as Stephen Malkmus. I mean, what a performance he puts in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge of the movie is like every segment, everyone's in their own movie. Like, the movie that the musical performers are in is a documentary about their 8-week process to putting on a show. The movie that Joe is in is a mockumentary satire about an actor trying to get into character for a biopic that shouldn't be made, that nobody wants, that won't be good. And a guy like this, I mean, he's got a million projects. We have him for a week. He's got to figure out what to do and create his own rhythm, like, in 3 days to get into this. And it speaks to his fearlessness and his boldness and his playfulness, that he just was completely game to both lampoon his peers, his profession, the media, himself a little bit. That's really, it's courageous in a way that is not something I think a lot of actors would do, and is funny because it is 1000% antithetical to the spirit of Pavement. Specifically the spirit of Malkmus. Malkmus would never do anything that would make fun of himself or make him look ridiculous. But Joe does that in the spirit of honoring Malkmus, which is yet another of these contradictions without which the movie just does not make sense to me.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, courageous is a word that is kind of thrown around a lot for actors doing sort of traditional biopic performances, and this is a film about kind of preparing to do biopic performances in a beautiful way. I also loved the dig about Bohemian Rhapsody, which felt like a very similar dig to the Smashing Pumpkins.
Sure, and that's the thing. Like, that's exactly right. We're allowed to do that because that's very low-hanging fruit, but it is within the Pavement vernacular to just take a pot shot at something that is more successful than you'll ever be, more well-known than you are at the moment, but that you feel undeniably you are better than, and therefore you can make fun of. And we just felt like that was allowable. And that, again, is just me and Joe improvising and riffing mockumentary style over one day of filming that entire storyline.
Yeah, and he does it amazingly well.
And
so
it's
fun
he's
to
just
watch.
charming and funny. Like you could do that exact thing with anybody. Anybody who's an unknown actor could do that. It wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't land. And if they're not as innately charming and charismatic and funny as he is, that segment would not be as necessary as it is in the movie.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to, that sort of leads me on to thinking about context, and the context of Pavement and this film. So, and what I mean by that is like because I teach students, and obviously Oasis are performing this weekend, they're back on tour.
Yeah.
And I saw Oasis like 14 times. They were a huge band for me. And students can't believe that. But the young people are really excited to see them. And they don't understand the context. They're not aware of it. And what's more, they don't care. They just have the songs. They have the music. And so when, you start to tell them about like Britpop and Blur and like Class and all this kind of stuff, they're just like, we don't give a shit. We just like the songs. And then I'm watching this film and I'm thinking like, it's really interesting because it's kind of introducing context for a modern audience who might just have heard Pavement on Spotify or whatever, through a kind of like, through the internet, through different means. But so they only have the music to really think about. But it's kind of introducing them to who this band were, why they did matter, and also like where they sort of sit. But also at the same time, kind of completely not interested in any kind of history lesson or context. And that seemed like a really interesting choice in terms of both kind of like the contradiction. Is that one of the contradictions that you were thinking about in terms of how much do I care about capturing the band's history and how much am I interested in just kind of like disregarding that, do something else?
Well, it depends. Like, first of all, I genuinely believe that the only people who care about history and context are people who already know it. Like a 23-year-old who is nostalgia obsessed and loves 90s music does not care at all about the inner turmoil of Pavement hiring Nigel Godrich to make Terror Twilight. To Pavement fans, that is just like a crucial late career narrative. To someone who likes them now because they like the music, that is so irrelevant that we don't even put it in the movie because it just does not matter. The only people who care about that already know that story. And this is this inherent contradiction in storytelling, who you're making this for. Because a lot of these films, when they come out, they're just telling a story that probably the viewer already knows or is at least passingly familiar with. And these other people, they don't care about that. And beyond that, I think what we sort of found and what we knew from the beginning is because the Pavement, the nuts and bolts, the actual narrative, it is incredibly simple and wholly unremarkable. Even if you talk to the band, we got together, some EPs led to some albums, we played, we toured, played some bigger venues, played some smaller venues, made a couple albums and broke up. That's really how they tell the story. It's never like, man, it was crazy. What was it like being in this band? Oh my God, it was insane. It's like, nobody says that. So the story is just not that interesting. It's not that juicy. It's not that dramatic. So you really can't do that much with it. And I feel like in a 2-hour movie, the actual story you need to know to follow why the band matters is like 30 minutes worth of information, which is why I feel often these films just really stretch out this story, or people watch this and they're like, yeah, you really don't learn very much about them in this movie. It's like, there's nothing to learn. They were an underground sensation who put out EPs, got good press, put out albums, shot themselves in the foot, put out more albums and broke up. That's the story.
Yeah.
The most interesting and dramatic things are Gary Young as a charismatic figure who kind of flames out, and this period when they were ascending, put out an album that halted their momentum And at that exact moment, we're playing a package tour with people who were much more successful. We spend a lot of time on those 2 story beats. That's kind of it. And it just depends on how people want to or need to approach or understand this form of storytelling, because people are inclined to think, oh, it's all so dramatic and interesting. And it is in a way, and in another way it's not. Like, we have this footage in the movie of the only time we really allude to the 2010 reunion is Spiral playing one of his songs while Malkmus is laying on the ground, just making a mess of it. And to hear Malkmus talk about, you put that in the movie, that's like, oof, that's pretty dramatic. To hear him tell it, he was tired. His parents were in the front row. He didn't know they were going to be in the front row. He walked out, saw them, got incredibly nervous, and just felt like he needed to retreat away from how nervous he felt at this show at the end of their long tour, where suddenly his parents are 10 feet away from him and it made him uncomfortable. So he tanked the performance. That is not incredibly interesting. That's also very not rock and roll. So we don't tell that story. We play that beat as much more of a classic 2 leads of the band are fighting on stage moment, which it is, but it's not even it is, and it's more than that. It is that, but it's also less than that. It's really just one guy who wasn't in the zone that day.
Yeah, what you say doesn't seem very rock and roll when you put it. But the result then, which I think is so refreshing, and maybe this is because I'm a fan, is that it's so much of it is just about the music and the songs, in a way that other films seem to try and compensate for that with this dramatic story. And it's a really great advertisement for the music, and for the it sort of gives lie to this idea that they just sort of bummed around and didn't care, and just sort of everything was kind of thrown out into the world, which it wasn't. Like, it's a really amazing body of work which still holds up and continues to sort of bring people in.
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm says, like, if the movie is good, it would help us because it would make people see us this way, and if the movie turned out to be a disaster, the music is bulletproof and it kind of doesn't really matter.
Nice. Nice. That's a nice place to end the Pavement stuff. I wanted to mention and sort of chat a little bit about Videoheaven, which you also made this year, and is kind of doing festivals, and I think is sort of having some New York shows as we record this. And yeah, very, 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 very different film, but also, very much your film, and another kind of testament to your, I would say it's a naff word, but it's, sort of criticality, your sort of interest in really kind of getting into something in a kind of deep way, which I think is evident in kind of your narrative work as well. And has the bonus of having Joe Cleary in both films.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, it's also, I've been working on it for 10 years. So it's the sort of concurrent nature of this is more of a coincidence than anything. But, both of these things, obviously Videoheaven, in as much as it takes place anywhere, it sort of tracks video stores on screen from the mid 80s to the present. So, it does take place literally during the same era of Pavement that takes place in the 90s and beyond. And yeah, it's different, but it's the same, and it's sort of another work of playful film historical criticism and appreciation, but they're different in some ways. But yes, Joe is in both.
Yeah, which was nice. And again, nice to see him in that role, having just seen him in Pavements. One of the things that you sort of describe those films and TV shows, is kind of films talking to themselves about cinema, which is something I'm really interested in. And it reminds me of Kent Jones's quote a couple of years ago about poetry in cinema, and after Godard died, this idea that films are always returning back to their own construction and sort of always sort of reminding audiences that they are films. And, this is both a film that does that, but also invites us to think of cinema as something which is doing that in a variety of different ways. And in this case, through this very, very specific act of renting videotapes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's such a long and complex project. But I guess both of these, I'm just obviously very nostalgic for, and I miss going to the music store to purchase a single CD and kind of holding that and cherishing it. And I also miss going to the video store to rent a single movie. And clearly both of these movies are about trying to access that feeling.
And it's interesting. I noticed this. I mean, I'm not the first person to notice it, but people don't buy films in movies. It's always about renting.
I pointed that out. I mean, it's someone saying why is X, Y, or Z not in this almost 3-hour long essay film you made? Yeah, you don't see it. Obviously, towards the end of the film, into the 2000s, you see characters in movies who have a lot of DVDs at home. But and we say this in the film, to depict the behavior on screen of going to a store full of movies, it was not about ownership and building your collection. It was about the temporal possibilities of what will the next couple of hours of your life be. If you're buying a movie, as those of us who do that know, you might watch it 5 years later.
Yeah.
If you're renting a movie, your intention is to watch it within the next day or two.
Yeah.
And the experience rendered on screen in the 180 some odd clips we have, time and time again, is about characters who go to the space of the video store as a means of choosing what path their immediate future is going to take.
Which aligns it very much with going to the cinema. This idea that they're kind of diametrically opposed kind of collapses on itself, because it's a very similar, particularly in movies, depictions of going to the cinema. That feels very similar to that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the process of putting it together in a kind of in a community way, because it feels like I can't imagine you knew all of those films had video. I mean, I imagine your knowledge is extensive, but there are, like you say, there's a lot of material there. So was it a process of just, the sort of the New York and sort of your kind of film community hive mind of suggestions as well as kind of traditional research?
It's plenty of that. Yeah. I mean, the film started in collaboration with Daniel Herbert, who wrote his book, which is his thesis, called Videoland, which is a book about movie culture at the American video store. It's subtitled. And that is kind of our basis. And Dan's research for a chapter that he deleted from his book led him to a list of about 50 or 60 films, which in his deleted chapter that we started our movie with, he talked about maybe 15 of them. But he had a list to grow off of. We did other research. But it really is it's piecemeal. A friend gives you 3. There's got to be 40 movies in our edit that the answer is between 2014, when I started working on this, and now. I just watched that movie and I clocked it. There's no amount of research that would tell you that in Misery, the character is, just not even one of the 2 main characters. The sheriff stops in a gas station, and while he's talking to the guy who runs the gas station, the guy is putting videotapes back on a little rotating rack at a side of the road country guy. No amount of research will tell you that.
Yeah.
You just need to at some point have watched Misery. No amount of research, no matter how good your academic students doing the work are, is going to tell you that in the background of Lethal Weapon 3, Riggs and Murtaugh walk out of a location and the camera pans from a video store on the left side of the street to a video store on the right side of the street. That is not researchable.
Yeah.
That is something that since 2014, I watched all the Lethal Weapon films, and I was ecstatic to clock that in the background of the third one. And there's dozens of other examples of that. A friend of mine, Michael Ferrari, who was the head buyer at the video store I worked at in New York 3 years ago, he sent me a list of 20 other movies that we had completely just no one else had known about these. His knowledge was just deeper than others, and there's almost 24 films that it's like we wouldn't have found this if it wasn't for Michael. And it's just it's like building a giant quilt.
Yeah, it does sound, and it's one of the things I really enjoyed about the film was how you situate the video store in different contexts, particularly in that sense of like it's there. You know, it was a part of the landscape. It was part of everyone's life as a space that just does not exist anymore. So it's kind of nostalgic, but not in the twee way, in that really kind of heartfelt way of something that just does not exist anymore.
Well, there's very few things that just don't exist anymore. Obviously, they do exist, and there are enough in the world that some people are lucky enough to say, I have access to one. But it doesn't exist to the extent of perhaps 95%. And that is just remarkable. It's remarkable because something that was once basically ubiquitous can be that decimated, not over a century, but really over one generation.
Yeah.
There's no other examples of that. I mean, there's things from the 20s and 30s that don't exist because technology moved past them.
Yeah.
And technology did move past this in a way, but not in such a way that you would, technology has moved past records and books too, but record and bookstores are everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. They seem to have not bounced back, but sort of been resilient enough, or just stayed around just enough to be able to get on the boom. Whereas VHS particularly, and DVD to an extent just haven't had the same luck in that sense. Thank you for that, and thank you for the section on David Spade as the kind of the uber nerd.
Everyone laughs at that. That's a good moment.
It's a good little moment, but also it's nice that he's just seen in that way. But what was I watching last night? It's not a video thing, but I was watching something last night where he pops up as an addict. Light Sleeper.
David Spade's in Light Sleeper?
Yeah, he plays theological addict or theological junkie.
I don't remember. We have a shot of Light Sleeper in the movie where Willem Dafoe was walking out of a store with rentals, but I don't remember the David Spade part of that.
Yeah, he's just one of William Dafoe's clients, espousing about God. So it was kind of that was nice to see him in this
interesting
array of films. Yes, he's
clocked that when I last watched Light Sleeper, but that is not in my brain every day.
No, it's not. It wasn't in mine, but it was nice to have an extended period of time with David Spade over the last few days, and to have an extended period of time with these two amazing movies. So
thanks for watching them. It's between the two of these, it's like 5+ hours of my deep cultural plumbing of my lifetime and all the things I miss and all the things I'm fascinated by, and it's nice that they're around at the same time, albeit, as I said, kind of a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, it's worked out nice, and it's worked out nice to have you on the podcast talking about this stuff.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Good luck with the rollouts.
Appreciate it. And I'll mention, Videoheaven is, you can just write to us and we can book screenings of it anywhere people want, in any film society, college, pop-up club. You can just write to Andrew, spelled the way you think, at conservecinema.org. We'll book the movie anywhere people think they want to watch a 3-hour documentary about video stores, and Pavements in the UK and other places on MUBI streaming July 11th.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll put all that in the notes as well. So thank you for sharing that, and speak to you soon. So yeah, thanks to Alex for taking the time to chat to me just ahead of his, I think it was New York premiere, he said, for Videoheaven later that day. And as sort of Dario mentioned ahead of the chat, we go into the film quite a lot in our episode from the London Film Festival, where we sort of review the film. So we probably won't get too much into what we think of the film now, but we do want to sort of spend some time chatting about the chat that Alex and I had. So Dario, hit me.
Yeah. Well, I just thought, just off mic there, we were saying that, you know, it's one of those conversations that actually leads to bigger questions that kind of sit in the film, but then can be taken beyond the film. And that can be about, you know, form and what have you. But it's interesting listening to people who are in the weeds, who are in the bubble of a particular phenomenon. And then a very specific kind of band, I think, like, because before I'd seen the film before, I'd never heard of them, right?
Yeah.
And it just sort of reminded me how different, like, our upbringings probably were, our relationships to culture from a sort of origin story perspective was, and then at times kind of like you ingest things, or your relationship to things is very different from mine, and it's just simply, you know, that's always going to be the case, isn't it? But there's certain things that kind of trigger that, I think, which is always interesting to me when it happens. I mean, maybe I'll ask you a few more questions if that's all right, and then we can kind of shoot the breeze on that. I mean, the first one, it was interesting to me that you started this interview with a comparison to another film, because I've made a mental note not to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And I felt it was interesting because he was like, you compared it at the beginning to Synecdoche, New York. And then he said, you know, well, I hate that movie. And I just thought, oh, fuck. You know what I mean? And it's funny how you sort of reacted to that in the sense of you didn't sort of back away. You had the explanation. So I was interested just to get your sort of thoughts on the feelings that you had at that moment where it was like, oh, okay, right, what do I do now, kind of thing.
Yeah, there was a bit of that. Because I definitely, I was kind of nervous about the conversation anyway, for reasons I sort of alluded to before. And then I didn't think I necessarily had a kind of unique take, but there's just something about formally the experience of rewatching the film, which felt very, very, very connected to the structure of that. So it felt like a good way to kind of start the conversation about all of the different things that make up Pavements, in terms of all the different forms and how they all are connected to different ideas around legacy, in a variety of different ways. So, yeah, it kind of definitely put me on the back foot. But what I appreciated again, which is one of the things, you know, is he invited me to
explain,
to work through it a bit, which kind of put me a bit at ease. And I think that part of it was, it helped that I wasn't really coming from a place of like, I mean, I love the bluntness. He's always really blunt, which I think is great. But it helped that it wasn't really a conversation about, isn't it? Do you like that film? You know, I think one of the things about, I didn't necessarily think it was an influence, more just that there's clearly a way of reading the film formally that sort of connects to that. And I think that's one of the ways that my brain does work, is like, I'm not really interested in like, do you like this movie, or is it a kind of direct influence, but kind of how things connect to wider sort of cultural texts or ideas. And that's something I'm interested in. Sort of my brain makes those links. And I think maybe that one of the things I'm probably not very good at as an interviewer is kind of putting my own thesis into it, maybe too early or maybe too much. And I think it was definitely the conversation grew to a sort of a better place once I was away from that line of thinking.
Yeah, no, I wasn't I wasn't making a kind of explicit critique. It was just, you start, interviewing is always a funny thing, isn't it? You kind of start where in your own mind seems a plausible or valid, relevant place to kick off from. And you always, obviously sort of one of your things is getting into the idea of form and that's clearly an important aspect of the film. And I think some of the most interesting conversation was that discussion about the relationship with the editor, and describing the editor who's the world's biggest Pavement fan, and sort of handing over the footage, and like for a director to sort of admit, I didn't know what the film was, but the editor said he did. That's an interesting thing for a director to say, I think, in this, I mean, not just in this day and age, but sort of generally, isn't it, where there is this project, I think, has it definitely sits within a relationship to the fans in a way that is more important than what a general audience would think, which is why sort of coming from my perspective, it is kind of very different. But then it's not kind of like, that sort of mainstream fan commercial, what do the fans want, how can we sell to the fans kind of thing. There's an honoring going on there, I think, which is really, really interesting. But and all that discussion of the musical not landing, I think, was really fascinating as well, and it led on to that idea of filmmakers working with so many registers and the complexity of the thoughts around that, and how he decided that the musical wasn't landing. You know what I mean? Because it's kind of like, I mean, for somebody who sort of isn't really in the project, you could, you might not know, because there's one thing, like if you'd have said to me before I'd seen the film that Pavement, wasn't actually a real band, I wouldn't have had any reason to doubt that in some way. Watching this film is saying, because you could say that the Joe, sorry, what's his name? Joe Neely,
Joe Cleary.
Joe Cleary, sorry, my brain went for it. Joe Cleary was clearly in a sort of pretend biopic mockumentary.
Yeah.
Then the conversation around the musical was they're taking it seriously, but it's not actually real. So you've got that kind of strange juxtaposition going on there, and the way that the archive footage is shot with the contemporary footage. There's a sense in which you could argue that Hero's a band that was never real in the first place. They sort of made it all up, and then they came together and kind of made it all up a second time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you didn't have any idea of the history, an alien coming down, you could make that assumption, which was really interesting to me. But then you get to that point. Yeah, you get to that point where, does all of this craft level of self-questioning irony, is there a point where it all collapses in on itself? For somebody who literally doesn't know anything about the band. And well, I'll come to another point, but maybe you want to make some points on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's I think that's really interesting, that idea that they could not be a real band. And I think that part of the way that Alex and Robert, I think, in the editing, kind of deal with the idea of sort of myth and legacy, and the story. And I loved it when you sort of saying like the story, it's the actual biography and the facts are not that interesting. There's a couple of points, but other than that, they're just a band. So what is it? So it's the kind of the invention of it does make you question, what is real, to the point of, particularly like if you're arriving now without context, you would have no idea that this was a band from the time, again, because of the reality of what they actually achieved. And I think that's one of the things that I really admire about the film, is how they both strike a balance between all of that stuff, so it never really tips over into anything, and the knowingness never gets smug. It's funny, it's pointed, it's smart, and you don't come away, well, I certainly don't come away, I feel like I've learned about the band as they are now, particularly in these kind of really small moments, which I think are really meaningful, as they're looking back, particularly through the museum stuff and that sort of exhibition, and some of the things they say there, which is like sell out corners.
It's really funny. I have to.
Yeah. And then also, but it's never kind of sentimental, and it's it's always kind of true to the spirit of the band as they've always been. And they're not
sorry, just
interested in.
can I just caveat? Can I just push back on a couple of things you said there? Because I think that, like, I'm just trying to find a way into this that takes what you said, because I think that your reaction to it is right in terms of that sense of it's not, it's not smug, from your perspective, because there is a context there. I mean, like when I was watching it, I was thinking to myself, so who's watching this then? So there's fans of the band, right? Then there's what you might call interested and open-minded film viewers generally. Then there may be Alex Ross Perry specific fans who are always going to. But then if you're coming in from the outside, I mean, I can imagine that there are there would be a lot of people who, you put this film in front of them, they'd be like, this is pretentious nonsense. You know what I mean? Like who have no, and I was thinking about that question in relation to all films generally. Do you know what I mean? It's like that how much do we bring ourselves to the table when we're watching something? And you're obviously, the band, and you're a fan in that sense, and I come with hopefully an open-minded, cinematic viewpoint here, that it's an interesting artifact as a film to engage with in that sense. But it's like, I think that there is a potential for somebody who's not in any of those categories to go, this is kind of insufferable, and maybe even a bit Emperor's New Clothes. But again, that's interesting because it kind of aligns with the band's sort of self-conception in some ways.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's like, are they great, or are they just dealing with the fact that they're trying to create an idea of what a great band looks like without being a great band, kind of thing,
Yeah, and I think, I think one of the reasons the film works is the band are doing none of that.
Right.
The band, and I think that happens a lot, is that the band do engage in a way that tries to get themselves to tell their story in a way but they're not. They're in it in the archive, and they potter around, and they're rehearsing. They're meaningfully rehearsing for the tour and then performing, but they're not really in it in the way that, so I think from a film viewer's point of view, it's pretty clear, or it should be pretty clear, that all of the stuff is coming from the filmmakers. It's not coming from the band themselves. The other thing as well, I think that, yes, it could be seen as pretentious, but for me, it's no more pretentious than all of these films which kind of take a very kind of staid and very kind of austere approach to telling the serious stories of like serious artists, where you have these talking heads from 400 different high-level people saying how great, how great and important these people are. And it just, this kind of like very austere kind of approach. And I'm like, that just seems pretentious, because I think there's an assumption there. And I think the assumption is different. I think here you could argue that there's an assumption that this band and they're important, or, although again, that's even undermined by the first title card, which tells you that they're the most important band in the world. Which is obviously a joke. But the others is, with other sort of music films, it's the assumption that you know why they're great. So we don't have to do any work. We'll just have Bruce Springsteen tell you that they're great, and therefore, and then we'll show you a bit of archive. And it's like, aren't they great? And it's like, no, this is a very, very, I would argue, very kind of niche, formal film in terms of trying to do that in a way that I haven't seen before, and arguably you probably never see again, because it's kind of unwieldy and chaotic in a kind of beautiful way. But I think that the idea of them being pretentious is kind of welcome. Again, I think that they had their moments of very, very deep pretension, and also they presented themselves pretentiously a lot of the time, which is kind of one of the reasons that they never got to be the success that some of those songs deserved, or that they wanted to be, or that was kind of mapped out for them, because they did shoot themselves in the foot, and being pretentious was kind of part of that. So it kind of worked. That's one of the things. It kind of works. Everything about it works because of the subject. But I think that is a thing of like, who's it for? Who knows? It was interesting when I did an event for my book in November. The film had just been at New York Film Festival, not long before that. And we didn't even show a documentary. We showed a trauma film, and talked about sort of 80s satanic panic stuff in the Q&A. But in the Q&A, someone piped up and asked Alex why there wasn't more of X in his Pavement film. Like it was clearly a fan had come and just wanted to have a beef with, with one bit of the film. And I think, this is not a film for a lot of fans, because fans want, a lot of the time, they want it very, very simply. They want to, which we've talked about, which is why there's this kind of, it's very much in that Marvel way, of like, or the canon, or the certain events they want to see. Like he mentions the thing about Nigel Godrich, the Radiohead producer producing Terror Twilight, and that's not in the film. And some fans are up in arms because they want to see everything laid out and it's like,
and they want the confirmation of the narrative, don't they?
Exactly, confirmation of the narrative. Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. And the other thing, I mean, again, from the conversation, and I really liked it in the film, was the Joe Deary lampooning every aspect of the acting profession and process, kind of inherently in what he's doing, and then even then the very essence of sort of taking pretending seriously. Because I mean, this is the one thing. I mean, maybe we'll have this conversation in the next episode as well, a little bit around stardom and how to treat stars. Because I've had a couple, and maybe I'll trail this for next episode. I have a couple of encounters in the last few days. In Islington, you do see people, and it's always interesting to me what the reaction is. But it's like on some level, that idea of an acting genius, when really Daniel Day-Lewis is essentially doing what every 5-year-old does in performance to their parents on a really basic level. It's just pretending like kids do, So that I found really interesting, and he's very good at it as well, doing the meta thing. And it's not, and I've seen a bit of Stranger Things, and I've seen him. He always struck me as sort of kind of typecast as the sort of adolescent douchebag in that, in those sort of teen drama type things. But he's very good. And I think the other thing and this relates again to the band themselves, and are they good or not, right? And like you clearly, you're being sincere when it's like the songs are great, right? And it's interesting at the end, again, it's something I sort of, as somebody who's not familiar with the music, you said it presents the songs really well. And I was kind of like, maybe I just didn't like the songs, or maybe I didn't feel that there was enough of a complete version of any of the songs in the movie for me to say, I want to go and listen to this, because there was nothing there that pushed me towards, I'm going to go buy this album or whatever. And it just sort of brought me back again to that conversation we've had many times before about the sort of the idea of where do you sit on the continuum of kind of good and bad, how you define what that is in music. And it's funny because I was thinking about that sort of spectrum of, on the one hand, you've got God-given talent over here, and then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got classically trained here. And that continuum is all on one line, right? But then almost sort of postmodern arts sit outside that, because it's kind of like both of those sides of the continuum of bullshit. You know what I mean? And I think, like, obviously Pavements sort of appeal to that sense of being outsiders, in terms of greatness has to sit in conditions that are outside of those sort of fundamental notions of how we view what art should be, or what art could be, or what is valuable, what is excellence, and all these slippery terms.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting. I think that, I mean, they're just good. No, I'm gonna give more of an answer than that. I think the thing is, like, that I can see why you would, if you were a complete unknown, you wouldn't necessarily come away with an idea or a kind of desire to listen to that stuff. They don't present the songs as full works very rarely, if at all. I think it's very much the fragments of it. What's what's really interesting for me, particularly with the film coming out now, and it's in the film a little bit, where they have sort of modern acts at the museum. All bands, I think they're all bands on Matador anyway, but like Snail Mail and Soccer Mummy performing Pavement songs, and those are bands have a direct, you can trace a direct link back to Pavement, in a way that Pavement are the sum of, which I think is there's a bit really early where they're giving interviews and they're talking about their influences and bands that they like, and it's huge in a way that very few bands are ever that clear and expansive about where their sound comes from. So their sound is their own sound, and they're going everything from like Echo and the Bunnymen and the Butthole Surfers and Black Flag, and every like 30 to 40 bands they're listing in various interviews that are all audio in the film. And then they have made a sound which is the result of all of those things. So it can only be their own sound. It's completely their own sound. And then it prefigures arguably not just the sound, a lot of the sound now, but the kind of the fact that the post-internet arrival, there is no kind of monocultural sound. So a friend of mine did a mix of stuff from the first half of this year. He does 2 mixes a year, Scott Tanner Jones, who was on the podcast. And I messaged him yesterday, I said, there's so much guitar on here and there's so much Pavement on here, because there's loads of bands doing really well, touring, playing Glastonbury, that you can trace a direct route in terms of that off-kilter, lo-fi pop sound, which kind of almost obscures the fact that within that there is really interesting melodic work, really interesting harmonic work, really interesting sound, really interesting lyrics, good lyrics, really catchy couplets. Like pop stuff is hidden within a lot of other stuff. These are pop songs, and they are good pop songs that will stand the test of time in the way that anything now would. And that doesn't mean it's going to be 10 to 15 billion streams, Ed Sheeran style, but you can actually see that there is a whole area of music now, particularly American indie as a kind of, as an aesthetic term rather than a sort of business term, where Pavement is the absolute, that's the band, that it all goes back to, and that's really interesting, given that they never really were that successful, but they were successful enough in the context of, and it's funny as well, because they were on the part of MTV where the influence happens. So in the same way that we've talked about Moviedrome in terms of films and stuff, and the amount of filmmakers in the UK who watch Moviedrome, the amount of filmmakers who watched 120 minutes on MTV, or sort of musicians, had this one show, all the weird stuff, all the quirky stuff, but the legacy of that is a lot of electronic music and a lot of guitar music, in its wake. So there are kind of, and I think, there are objectively kind of things that you can say, they are a great band. But it's interesting that they mention Queen and Bohemian Rhapsody in the film, because, arguably they're not that. And they, they were never going to be that. And, they were never even going to be the Smashing Pumpkins, as Alex says. Because they were, they weren't built for that. But that doesn't mean they weren't really, really good. And those songs aren't really, really good.
Yeah, no. I mean, and again, there's a goodness of criteria which you've just laid out, which is inarguable from someone like me, who just says, I didn't like the sound of it. You know what I mean? Or it's not that I didn't, it's not that I'm saying that. It's just that, that's the only thing I've got to go on. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think that's valid as well. I mean, that's not invalid. That's completely valid. Yeah. That's a taste thing.
But also it relates to the conversation where you were talking about the idea of, the culture and the lack of context, because it's not just the kids who have the lack of context. It's anyone really, isn't it? Who hasn't had any kind of entry point into this kind of stuff. And I guess just to round off as well, that the other, I mean it relates back to what we said at the beginning, that sort of sense of our mine and your origin story. It's interesting because it's always interesting to have these conversations where there is a sort of quite a big gap between not necessarily the way we interpret things, but what we consider relevant and important, because it's influenced us as a childhood. And yeah, I mean, it's like when you talk about that sort of West Coast indie musical heritage as like almost as if it's kind of like the Bible. Do you know what I mean? It sort of it does sort of, I'll listen to it, but I have no frame of reference, and almost kind of like I can't like if you talk about Bruce Springsteen, I understand what you're talking about. But when you talk about that, or people talk about, I don't know, like Nirvana or all the bands that you've just noticed and how it all kind of sits together and stuff like that, it's kind of like, okay, fine, I'll take your word for it kind of answer on my sense. And I had no, like, I could, it sounds ridiculous, but I could talk about in that way about late 1970s, early 80s tennis, and you'd just be in the same vein, like, well, who cares? You know what I mean? In that sense, it's
well, I do care. I think, and I think that's the thing is, like, I would be really interested in that, because, I mean, that's what I'm interested in, is not just learning, but also learning from people who have such a deep interest in the thing that they're sharing. Like that always interests me. Let's do that next time. Let's do that.
No, but I'm not saying that I want to do that, because it's what I'm saying is that in talking about it, at the back of my mind, I'm always like, who gives a shit? You know what I mean? Beyond me and a few other people.
Yeah.
But like, I what you've just said there is exactly the point. It's like, it's not necessarily particularly the subject matter. It's the person saying it and the way that they're saying it, and their ability to sort of say, that even though I know this is not your thing, it's interesting because of this, and this. And then, yes, I guess it's just that, that more general thing is that on some level, everything is kind of worth kind of thinking about,
Yeah. And to what you were saying in terms of, like, the idea of acting, I think that's a really good example in terms of, like, it's one of those things where there's a case to be made that it's all just absolute nonsense, all of it. And it doesn't matter. But obviously it does, because people have responded to performance for centuries.
Yeah.
So it does and it doesn't. And that creates a weird tension. And like there is certainly a kind of an awareness from my sort of recently in terms of how I think about things and how I share how I think about things, which, I'm aware that sometimes I can come across as a very kind of know-it-all snobby nerd who's trying to say, well, this is great because I like it, which is not what I ever try and do, but I'm aware that's how it comes across sometimes, which I don't like about myself. But
everybody's like that, Neil. I'm like that. So it's like, it's just interesting. I think, but the problem is, I think, not the problem, but the thing is, you do have the kind of research backup. So it makes people intimidated, talking about intimidation,
Yeah, and I don't like people feeling intimidated, because I want to have a conversation, and that's the same with Alex. I think one of the and to go back to that, to what I found challenging about this conversation was that if I didn't know him, he'd be a filmmaker that I absolutely loved. I love all of his work, and it sits in my wheelhouse so perfectly, kind of classic American indie, like that's my bag. So if I didn't know him when Color Wheel or Listen Up Philip would have come out, I'd have been all over that filmmaker in the way that I'm all over Soderbergh, or I'm all over P.T. Anderson, like he's a brilliant filmmaker. So there's this thing for me, which is like, I knew him before that, screened his work in the UK when no one had heard of him and no one else was screening it, before the Color Wheel, his film Impelex. And we've sort of known each other and been friends since. And it's like, part of me is like, well, why? This is his work for me, and he sits in this world which I revere so much. So I worry that my conversation is just going to come across as this kind of, nerdy fanboy without any kind of backup, without anything to say or ask. And also the question of, like, I'm sure he's only doing it because, I screened this film like 20 years ago, which is a kind of insecurity. So I kind of take that in, because I'm like, this, unlike all the other people I know that I've kind of met along the way, that there's such a reverence for that type of American work, and such a love for it, kind of voracious love for it. That's kind of, I think that's what kind of makes me feel a bit like what sort of talking to him is kind of, but he's also lovely and he's also nice, and and I really enjoyed the conversation.
And an interesting voice as well. I thought, I like tonally.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I think that'll about do it. I enjoyed both those conversations. I thought that was really interesting. And
yeah, for sure, that's really nice.
So we'll wrap it up there, and we are, by the grace of the time travel portal that is podcasting, we're going to talk a little bit more, but that will be on the next episode. So yeah, let's wrap it up there. Neil, anything more to add? Do you want to say any more final thanks or anything like that?
Just another thanks to Alex and to everyone to check out the show notes. And if you do want to screen Videoheaven, the email address is in the show notes to book yourself a screening.
Fantastic. So yeah, thanks to our listeners for your continued support. This has been the Cinematologist Podcast. Thanks for listening.